Okay, so today we're talking about trialing communication devices, specifically looking at the computer access, accessible apps and control features that are frequently available in devices. And I think now, as we're really moving into this age of technology, social media, lots of what we do is technology and computer based. It's the same for our users who use AAC. They want to be able to do everything in their life as well within an integrated system. So my name's Amy. I'm a speech pathologist by background. I've been with Link Assistive for the last 5 years or so now. This webinar's really come from lots of inquiries around what else is possible with AAC devices. So we're going to talk today about that. Before we get started, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. I'm over in Western Australia in Perth in Whadjuk country, so I think we've got people from around Australia, so welcome. Today we've got a couple of supporting resources. Most of what I'm talking about in regards to the trial is available in our communication device trial guide. You'll probably notice that we've been sending this out when you get your loan dates recently. So that's one of the resources. Lisa's also popping the trialing, the PowerPoint slides for this in the chat, and also some of our feature matching tools as well. So just to go over the steps to trial. We are thinking about when we trial this first step of investigating options. So we're going to talk about what's possible with AAC devices and really try and work out what our clients are wanting from their device. From there, you can request a trial. It's the same for most suppliers of AAC devices. At Link Assistive, we have free 3-week loans, so you can trial our systems and any accessories you need. We're going to talk quite a bit about preparing for trial. It's really important with these control features that we know what we want to test and we've got everything in place. You can then trial the device. As I mentioned, Link Assistive is 3-week loans. And during this trialing phase is where we really want to test out the technology, test out the device. Is it going to do what our person needs it to be able to do? And that's where your suppliers can help you, offer tech support, offer the training and the setup that we need. From there, we evaluate the trial. I think particularly with our control features, maybe one device or software offers us more than something else. Maybe it doesn't quite work as we'd expected it to. We might need to trial further devices, or we might be good to go and starting to apply for funding. So if we think about today and what we're talking about the person being at the centre of any kind of assistive technology that we're trialling and potentially applying for. So in terms of our AAC devices or communication devices, we're now getting much more integration with accessing computer, accessing environmental controls. So that might be your TV remote, security cameras, call systems. We are working with people who want to do gaming, for example. Maybe they want to integrate with their mobile phone technology because they're needing to use an alternative access method, eye gaze, touch, head mouse, switch access. So maybe we're looking for that integration into the communication device. Maybe we're working with people who really want to keep access to their social media. Maybe they want to read online books. Maybe they want to surf the internet. So there's a lot that we have potential to integrate into our communication devices. And as we work through this, you may find that, yeah, it's a great idea to integrate it. For some individuals, it may be better to keep things separate. So there's no hard and fast rule about this of how much you need to integrate. Maybe keeping it separate and different systems work better for different people. But this is what we're kind of going to look at today. So my first step when I'm working with someone is thinking about the client first. Before we start looking at technology, before we start trialing things, we've got to think about what's possible and we've got to think about what's required by a client. So just because that person, just because the device can do it, I guess, doesn't mean that that suits that person or that person wants the device to be able to do a certain thing. So we've got to start with the client. What are they currently doing? What do they want to be able to do? Maybe they at the moment are working and they access particular software on their computer, and maybe they have a degenerative condition and they're really keen to keep working, but they need access to certain software. So finding those kinds of things out of what are they using already, what potentially may they need access to is our first step. There are some resources to help you with this. In the communication trial guide, there's a control feature checklist. If you're new to what's possible, there's a bit of a list to get started. And that might be something that you sit down and talk about with your client, with your user, talk about what might be possible, talk about what's a priority for them, what's really important at the moment or might be important in the future. It's worthwhile at this stage looking at what current technology they have. If you're looking at phone integration, for example, write down what type of phone they have currently, because that will help us as a supplier, help you look at the options. So there's some resources there. There's also the Matching Persons with AAC Technology model by Katja Hill that we've put together a bit of a resource of what types of features you may need to consider. So that resource is in the chat as well. This topic can become quite complex as we were pulling together this presentation. So I want to just start right at the basics of what we're looking at in terms of components. So when we're looking at assistive tech and AAC options, we're looking across 4 areas. So firstly, we need to think about the hardware. So that's the computer itself. That might be the Surface Pro, it might be an iPad, it might be the TD Pilot or the i13. It's kind of it's the shell, it's the actual computer, similar to you've got your laptop or your iPad. So we've got to think about the hardware and what ports, connections, outputs, inputs that particular piece of hardware has. So that's one thing we'll be talking about today. Second thing we'll be talking about is software. So on our hardware, we install software. So we might install Microsoft Word, Excel, AutoCAD, whatever software you need. It's the same with our devices and our hardware. We can add on additional AAC software like Grid 3, Communicator 5. You might have some software already inbuilt. And we've got to think about, is there any other software that this particular user wants as well? It may not be assistive tech software. It might just be Windows software or Apple iOS software. Make sure you write down what we need access to. Then within our software, we often have different documents or specific page sets and layouts for different things. And those that are familiar with AAC software, you've probably come across different page sets before as well. In the same way that we buy accessories for our computer, we might buy a different mouse, keyboard. We can also buy accessories for our AAC systems, which often give us more options for control. So for example, if you're using an iPad as your communication device, it doesn't have inbuilt infrared, so you need an accessory to help with that. And that's what we're going to talk through. So why do we want to access the computer? Why do we want to have all this access? We can use it for work, recreation, shopping, connection with others, social media. There's lots of reasons why the people we work with may want to access the computer and access more control of their environment. So just to give you a bit of an overview of what our options are, in terms of accessing the computer, so I'm talking about accessing a Windows computer, just like we would. or accessing an iPad, just the same. There's software now built in to the eye gaze devices in particular to be able to operate the computer. So from an eye gaze access point of view, if you're using the iMobile 5, for example, or the PCI 5 on a standard Windows computer, or you're using the i13 dedicated device, these devices are running Windows 10. So with the computer control software, which is installed on these systems, you can essentially operate Windows the same way that you would if you were using a mouse or a touch screen. So we're going to have a bit of a look at that. If you're using something like the TD Pilot, that's also got inbuilt controls to be able to operate that iOS environment. And that uses something called assistive touch, which some of you may have used with switch access in the past. So at its very basics, some people may just want computer control. They don't need additional AAC software. They just won't need a way to access their computer. And you may find this inbuilt software is sufficient. So if we were looking at a Windows environment, if you look at the video on the left, this is just a standard Windows computer. And what you're going to see is the computer control in action. So you look to what you want to activate. You'll see that circle come up, dwell your gaze, and then you can open up a mouse control. So you can do left click, right click, double click, click and drag, the same that you would do with a standard mouse. So in this way, you can essentially operate a computer the same way that someone always has. You just have to learn how to do it with eye control. And this is specific to eye control, this software, but it gives you the idea that if someone can learn this computer control, then they really have every option available to them. In regards to an iPad iOS environment, this is the video on the right, it's using something called assistive touch. So again, we're using eye gaze dwell. You can use assistive touch with switches as well. But with it, it means that we can operate and use all the gestures that we would use with our hand on iOS. So we can use the app switcher, we can use scrolling, we can do a tap to click, we can access the home button. So it's a matter of our user learning what kind of gesture or mouse control function they need to then be able to operate an iOS or Windows environment. Okay. So you might find that your user just wants to access the computer and the device itself is all you need. Some people want to be able to integrate with other technologies. So I'm thinking TVs, lights, their mobile phone, for example. What we've really got to think about is how each system talks to each other. And we're going to go into that. We've got to think about reliability, particularly if it's something like a call system, a door, an electric bed. We've got to think about, can we afford for something to not work or go wrong? And what's the most reliable way for this to work and be accessible to the user? We've got to think about positioning and access. For example, eye gaze devices often have to be straight in front of you, obviously to be able to position and read your eyes. But when you have a device in front of you, it's not great in watching TV. So, maybe positioning and access becomes challenging for certain tasks. We've also got to think about changes to technology. Technology is rapidly changing. And we've got to think about how assistive technology is going to keep up with the changes to technology. And are there ways, maybe it might be more expensive way, or maybe as a different way that's going to give us more longevity to that piece of technology and access. And we'll talk about that. Sometimes we have to think about the other people living in the house. So for example, if you're using Google or Alexa, which have voice commands, if there's 5 people talking at that smart speaker, that often can make it really unreliable. So we might need to consider other people in the house, and that might influence our choice of options. We may need to think about, is it appropriate to have all this integrated in one device, or would separate be better? All things to think about, and again, all individual. So our first step is to know the connection. And if you're anything like me, and this is all brand new to you, don't worry, you can find it out. It's, I think, a bit about knowing that there are different options, and it's important that we find out before we tell someone that you can or can't do it with specific devices. So we've got to think about what connections, or I guess how they talk, how they send it, but then also how systems receive that connection as well, because not all devices and hardware have all the connection options, and that again might influence the decision making around which AAC system is best for someone. So when we talk about connections, we're talking about things like radio control, Wi-Fi, voice control, Bluetooth, Z-waves, infrared control, USB control. So there are lots of different ways that devices talk to each other. So we need to know what that is. So something, for example, like TVs, often they're infrared. So we need our device to have an output that sends an infrared signal, and then that can operate the TV. In saying that though, TVs and technology seem to be changing a lot, and sometimes people have Bluetooth remotes. It's not infrared. Sometimes TVs are operated over local Wi-Fi networks and things. So it's something to keep in mind is, if someone says to you, you know what, I really want to be able to operate my TV, find out as much information as you can about the TV and about the connection and the remote that's used for it. Something like lights, there are lots of options for this. Maybe we do it through a radio control with extra accessories. Maybe we're using smart speakers to do it. So it's really finding out that particular appliance or item that you're trying to control and what the connection is. And then we match it with the device and see if it's possible. So to give you a bit of an idea of what Link Assist's devices can do, for the dedicated devices like the i110, which is switch accessible and touch accessible, or the i13s, they have an internal receiver of Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. So we can connect to, say, Bluetooth speakers, or potentially a Bluetooth connection to a phone. We can connect to the internet. What they have in terms of output, or the connections that they send, is infrared. And you could also do voice output using AAC software. And therefore, what that lets us control is infrared appliances. That might be TV, might be infrared toys. If we've got an output of voice, we can control the Google Home, for example. And essentially, because you've got internet access, you can really control anything that's within Windows. So you can access your internet browser, Facebook, etc. Again, if you're using computer control that we talked about before. For our iMobiles, so this is like a Surface Pro tablet with an eye tracker attached, or switches attached, maybe using a Surface Pro tablet, they don't have infrared built in. So you really only have that voice control as an option. And we'll talk about some accessories if you want to change that. So think about kind of what they receive and what they can send. And we've got to match that up. For our TD Pilot, or for people using iPads, again, they can connect to Wi-Fi, they can connect to Bluetooth and things, but you don't have any inbuilt additional connections. It's all voice output. So you might be able to use smart speakers, but in saying that, a lot of the time now, things are connected over Wi-Fi. So if that particular person has a smart home or a TV or something that can be connected and controlled via an app, you could potentially do this with these devices using the assistive touch that we had a look at. So not all devices have all connections. So you've got to think about, do I need an accessory to be able to control something? So when we send out trial devices, the accessories aren't with it. So please let us know if there's something in particular that you need to trial. So for our iMobile 5, Surface Pro tablets, you'll need an infrared interface sender, which might be the IR. BJ Live will also have one. If you're using the iPad or the TD Pilot, you're going to need an infrared interface as well. So by having the device plus an accessory means that you might have more control options. Okay, so it all really comes down to knowing what that person wants their device to do and what accessories, what systems we need to make sure we're aware of and put in place before we trial. So from a hardware point of view, we've talked about the devices and what's inbuilt, and we've talked a little bit about accessories that we can add on. If we also add on assistive kind of AAC software, such as the Grid 3, Communicator 5, TD Snap, we can often get added functionality. The things we need to consider in terms of our software and why it might be an option that we need for someone is their access method. So, for example, switch access. You can't use the computer control and things, so you may need to use that through an AAC piece of software. We might need to think about ease of use. So for some people, operating Windows 10 with the computer control just might be too complex and we really want to simplify it. Maybe we're working with a young child who wants to operate their TV, but we only want it to turn the TV on and off, and we want to be able to get to ABC Kids. So we just want to be able to fully customize something to have 2 buttons on the page, on and off, and ABC Kids. And what AAC software lets us do is have that customization. Maybe I'm working with someone who needs bigger icons because of their access. Maybe I'm working with someone who really wants integration. So they want to have their Communicator 5 or Grid 3 homepage, and that's kind of the hub. They don't want to use the back end. I guess the Windows 10, side of their device. They want it all integrated and it to launch automatically. Have a think about that. We might also want to think about the person's needs now, but also their needs into the future. I think this happens a lot for young kids where we might pick the AAC software really based on communication. But then down the track, as they become teenagers, they also want social media and all these kinds of things. So maybe we need to think about that in our decision making. Same with our degenerative population, where we might think, well, at the moment, we just need AAC to support face-to-face communication, but down the track, we may need alternative access and things as well. So have a think about that, and that's going to help you determine what software might be most suitable to that client. And that's something, obviously, you can use your suppliers to help you out with as well. So if we're thinking about computer control, and maybe we need to be able to customize things better, Communicator 5 and Grid 3 have their own inbuilt grid sets. You can customize it, you can make it bigger, you can make it smaller, you can take away features, you can add features. So if you really want that full customization, that may be a good option. If you're working with someone who wants to be able to control an external computer, TD Snap offers an accessory called Access It. And what this is a USB that plugs into the external computer, and they can potentially operate that external computer via their device. So they can program buttons that launches Word, that moves the mouse around the screen, and they're controlling an external computer rather than controlling the internal computer of the device. So that's yet another option that we can do. If you've got any questions, throw them in the chat as well. I know this is a lot of information. In terms of recreation, there's so much out there now that people want to access. I think over COVID, it's really growing again. So accessible apps can be a really good way to give options to people for Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Messenger, Netflix, TikTok, Kindle, Zoom, all these mainstream pieces of technology that all of us use. One of the challenges with accessing mainstream apps and mainstream websites is that they're constantly changing. I think I update apps on my iPhone every week because they're constantly improving things and bug fixes and adding features. One of the challenges for our AAC software, such as Communicator 5 and Grid 3, is keeping up with all those changes. So I don't know if you've used inbuilt Facebook page sets before or inbuilt Spotify page sets, and then the links break and suddenly the play button doesn't work, or my link out to YouTube doesn't work anymore, and we have to wait for Smartbox for Grid 3 or Tobii Dynavox to update those page sets for us. I find that users get really frustrated by this because it's that one time that they want to be able to use it, one of the links breaks, and we're waiting on the companies to resync it. We have a new option available to us by Deber, their Join In apps. This is a paid add-on to Grid 3. It is a paid add-on in Communicator 5 for some devices, and it's included in some devices. What's good about this is that it's constantly updating. So Deber are in the background testing this all day, every day. And each time the user opens an app, it goes through an updating process. So they're not having to do it, I guess, outside and separate. And they're constantly adding more apps and things. So I'm going to play a quick video because I think it's the easiest way is to see how it works.
Device. Well, we've joined.
I'm back a bit.
Introducing Join In Accessible Apps. Wouldn't it be great if you could use the most popular apps on the web with your regular communication device? Well, with Join In, you can do just that. You can join in with social media and tell everyone what's on your mind. Join in with messaging friends and family via text chat, audio calls or video calls. Join in with entertainment, watching video clips, movies and more. And join in with work by participating in Zoom calls. Digital life should be accessible for everyone. It's time to join in.
So these apps, are more recent, but I'm finding them the most reliable and they're constantly updating. And I think if I go back to that thought around the future and keeping up with technology, we don't know the next great social media app, whether it's going to be Snapchat, TikTok, something we don't even know. We've got to think about how our users can keep up with those changes in technology. All right. So Join In might be something to explore. Other people want to look at phone access. Phone access is actually really complex. And my top tip is really test it out during the trial. Test it with that person's individual phone because technology is always changing and it's relying on the connection into the software. So with Grid 3 at this current point in time, you can use the iPhone 6S running the most recent iOS 13. So that's kind of when they started it. So anything iOS 13 and above. You can also use Android devices running Android 6 and above. So if we combine Grid 3 with a mobile phone, we can send and receive calls, we can use our voice on calls, we can listen, we can send and receive text messages, and we can read aloud messages. So Grid 3 allows us to use Android and iPhone and allows us to use quite a few different features. So again, it's important to think about what's important for the user and how they use their phone. Because in Communicator 5, we're much more limited in what we can do. We can only use Android phones with Communicator 5, and we need to get the additional BMAP to do it. It's free, but we need to download it. Currently, there isn't an option for iPhone, and there isn't an option to do voice calls. So thinking about those features is really important when we're pairing software and that person's existing technology. We can also connect to some call systems. I'm just going to quickly mention the Assist X. This system can be connected via infrared. So we can connect to a call system. That way, it's one that there's a patient unit, their device talks to that, and that sends an alert to the carer unit. So there is a video on our Facebook page for that. But call systems is one that I'd be really wary of reliability, really wary of safety, and just making sure that connections are stable. So if it relies on internet, is the internet going to drop out at a critical time? Those kinds of things. So that's some of what it can do. I think we really need to plan our priorities. One system might not be able to do everything. Maybe that particular system isn't an efficient and reliable way to do it. So we may need to plan our priorities. We might need to think about, well, what is the most important thing for our user to be able to do? What are we prepared to maybe give up or maybe do another way? And that's the decision making we need to think about as we trial and as we look at what option is going to be most suitable. But is there an easier way to do all this? We're seeing heaps more in the smart home integration space. Recently, I've been working with Intelligent Home, which is a smart home company over here in Western Australia. They're an NDIS provider. I think we're seeing lots more smart home companies become NDIS providers and understanding this population of alternative access and AAC. So recently we've tested some compatibility with the Control 4 smart home system. Essentially any smart home systems that have an app, could go on an iPad or the TD Pilot, can all be controlled with that assistive touch control that we looked at right at the start. The challenge is in Windows because often these smart home systems don't have Windows-based apps. They tend to be Android or iOS. We've managed to get it working with silent web requests with the Grid 3 for this particular Control 4 system. So there may be ways to do it, and that will be talking with the person's smart home company, bit of a combination between the smart home company, ourselves, and the manufacturers to see if we can find a way to integrate and access more mainstream smart home technologies. So to wrap up, make sure you're prepared for your trial. Be ready with a list of features and start doing your research on how to program and how to use those features. I'd really recommend you book in advance with one of our clinical team or our tech support to help you set up the controls right at the start of the trial so that you get kind of the full 3-week period. Also start talking with the person using the technology around their expectations. Things go wrong, things are messy. Sometimes we have to go back and forth a few times to work out why it won't talk to that particular TV or that individual phone. I think it's just worthwhile having that conversation that, you know, is going to take a bit of back and forth, and that's why we're trialing, to make sure that the technology works in the way that we expect it to. I'd really recommend booking in regular visits during trials, just so that you're not waiting till the end if something goes wrong and realizing after the trial's finished. We can kind of get on top of it quite quickly. During the trial, make sure you test all the key functions that are priority for that person. Sometimes just because a device or a software says it can do it, doesn't mean it can. We've had examples over here in WA where for some reason, a person's TV just doesn't talk to the IR sender and things. So it's worthwhile testing that person's individual appliances and phones and things. Feel free to give your clients Link Assistive's contact details for tech support. Get in touch with us when things go wrong. Don't wait until the last week, and we're here to help. That's our job. And like I said, visit regularly. During the trial, make sure you be really specific in your records. We know that people change jobs, or it can be a long time between trial and getting funding. So if you're specific around the hardware, what software you trialed, what page set you trialed, any accessories you needed, what specific phone you used for the phone connection, etc., the more specific you can be, it just allows for a smoother process into additional trials, rentals, or purchase of the device. So tech support, you can book online at a time that suits you. You just click the button at the top right of the website. And obviously you can contact us by phone and email everywhere. Please get in touch before you throw things out the window. All our trials devices can be returned for free via Australia Post. We'll send you that information when you're trialing. My main tip is about backing up, particularly if you've done lots of programming and found page sets that work for different users. Back it up so you can load it on when they get their own. If you are testing out, say on an iPad or iOS or Microsoft, and you've logged into any accounts, please log those out before you send it back. Just helps us reset it and not have to get in touch with you. Then you can apply for funding. I just wanted to flag that there are new guidelines if you haven't come across those yet in the NDIS space. Make sure you're familiar with them and collecting the evidence that you need for the kind of priced item that you're trialing. So to wrap up, here's our Link Assistive's email. Everyone's here to help your trials. So please get in touch. I'm going to turn off the recording